My name is Morgan Dawson. I turned 9 years old on June 14th, 2025. People say that at 9, you're still just a kid, but that summer in Destin, Florida, felt like I was standing on the edge of something much older. My dad had rented this small, weathered beach cottage right on the Gulf. The wood was salt, bleached, and the air always smelled like sunscreen and dead fish, but to me, it was perfect. I spent every morning in my red kayak. It was a bright, plastic thing that looked like a giant chili pepper floating on the turquoise water. I remember the feeling of the plastic seat getting hot under my legs and the way the paddle would drip cold salt water onto my knees every time I switched sides. I felt invincible out there, like the horizon was just a line I hadn't decided to cross yet. On the morning of July 12th, the water was unnaturally flat. It looked like a sheet of hammered silver. I was about 50 yards out, watching a group of small silver fish dart under my hull when the first pang hit. It wasn't a sharp pain, it was a heavy, wet thud inside my chest, right behind my breastbone.
It felt like someone had reached inside and squeezed my heart with a cold, damp hand. I tried to take a deep breath, but the air felt thick, like I was trying to inhale through a wet towel. I gripped the beelak handle of my paddle so hard my knuckles turned white. I remember looking back at the shore, seeing my dad sitting in his folding chair, reading a paperback. He looked so small, like a toy person. I tried to shout, but my throat felt like it was full of sand. The sky didn't turn dark, it stayed a bright, mocking blue. My vision started to fray at the edges, turning gray and fuzzy like an old television screen. I leaned forward, resting my forehead against the hot plastic of the kayak, and then the world simply tilted. I didn't fall out of the boat. The boat and the sea and the sun all just slid away from me into a quiet, heavy blackness. The transition wasn't a tunnel or a light. It was the sound of a sneaker squeaking on linoleum. I was suddenly in the corner of a room that smelled like industrial bleach and metallic blood. I wasn't in the kayak anymore. I was looking down at a small, pally body on a stainless steel table in the emergency department at Sacred Heart Hospital. I recognized the swim trunks, the ones with the little blue sharks, but the boy wearing them didn't look like me. He looked like wax. I saw a nurse, a woman, with a frantic ponytail and a name tag that said Sarah, slamming her palms into the center of that boy's chest. The sound was rhythmic and terrible, a wet, crunching thud. 1, 2, 3, breathe. 1, 2, 3, breathe. A doctor was shouting numbers. Asystole. Give me another round of AP. How long has he been down? His voice was flat, professional, but his forehead was slick with sweat. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching a movie that I'd seen BF and already knew the ending to. I looked toward the door and saw my father. He wasn't allowed in the room, but he was gripped onto the doorframe, his face a mask of absolute, shattering terror. He was silent, his mouth open in a soundless scream that seemed to vibrate the very air I was floating in. I wanted to tell him I was right there, standing by the cabinets filled with gauze and saline, but I had no breath to speak. I saw the monitor, a flat, glowing green line that refused to jump. The doctor picked up the paddles. Clear. The boy's body lurched, his back arching off the table as the electricity surged through him, but when he landed back down, he was still just wax. I realized then, with a calm that should have terrified me, that the boy on the table was a vessel that had been emptied. I wasn't just watching a medical emergency. I was watching the exit of my own life from the physical world. The room didn't disappear, but the walls seemed to lose their solidity. I felt myself being pulled, not upward, but through. It was like stepping through a heavy curtain, made of gravity. The frantic energy of the hospital began to mute, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. I wasn't in a meadow or a cloud. I was in a place that felt like a vast, EMP-tie hallway, yet I could still see the hospital below me. It was like looking through a layer of glass that separated two different speds of time. Down there, the doctor was looking at his watch, his shoulders dropping in defeat. He was about to call the time of death. I felt a sudden, sharp spike of grief, not for myself, but for the man in the doorway who was about to lose everything. Then, the temperature changed. It didn't get warm, it became certain. I turned around and I wasn't alone. I didn't see a bearded man in a robe like the pictures in the Sunday school flyers. I saw a presence that looked like concentrated light, shaped into a human form, standing in a space that looked like a quiet, high, seal-inged library. He was wearing a simple, dark tunic, and his hands were calloused, like someone who worked with wood or stone. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with a terrifyingly deep recognition. "Morgan," he said. His voice didn't come through my ears. It resonated in the center of my chest, exactly where the pain had been. "You are here because the clock has slowed, but it hasn't stopped." He stepped closer, and as he did, the walls of the library began to flicker with images, not of my past, but of things that hadn't happened yet. I saw my school, the local grocery store, and the church my mom dragged me to, but they looked different. The people in them were moving like ghosts, their faces filled with a desperate, frantic hunger. Jesus looked at the images and then back at me. His eyes were the color of the deep ocean before a storm. "I have something to show you," he said, and the air grew heavy with a warning I couldn't yet understand. "They think they are waiting, but they aren't ready." Jesus didn't lead me by the hand like a child. He simply walked, and the space around us shifted to match his stride. We were standing in the middle of the Publix, on 98, the one where my mom always complained about the price of orange juice. It was vivid. The hum of the refrigerated cases, the crinkle of plastic bags, the smell of rotisserie chicken. But the people were wrong. I saw a woman I recognized, Mrs. Gable from 3 houses down. She was standing in the produce aisle holding a bag of apples, but her face was a mask of gray exhaustion. She wasn't looking at the fruit. She was staring at her phone with a thumb that moved in a frantic, twitching blur. "Look at their hearts, Morgan," Jesus said. His voice was like a low frequency that bypassed my ears and went straight to my bones. As he spoke, the grocery store dimmed, and I saw a faint, flickering light in Mrs. Gable's chest. It was small, like a dying candle, and it was being choked by a thick, oily black smoke that seemed to leak out of the screen in her hand. Everyone in the store had it. This suffocating soot that smelled like burnt copper and old lies. They weren't fighting it. They were breathing it in, letting it settle into their lungs until their eyes went dull. "They are consuming things that cannot feed them," he whispered. "They have built a world where they can hear everything except the truth, and they have mistaken their comfort for safety." I saw a man at the checkout counter snap at the teenage cashier over a coupon. The darkness in him flared, a jagged spike of red that sliced through the air. It wasn't just a bad mood. It was a spiritual sickness, a profound absence of peace that made the very air in the store feel sharp. The scene shifted instantly. We weren't in the store anymore. We were in my own living room. It was later that evening, or perhaps a different day. Time here felt like water. My mom was sitting on the sofa, her face puffy and red. My dad was standing by the window, his back to her. The silence between them was like a wall of jagged glass. I saw my dad's phone on the coffee table. It buzzed. A text message lit up the screen from a name I didn't know, Elena. My mom didn't see it, but I saw the way my dad's shoulders tensed. I saw the shadow of a secret, a small, dark knot in his chest that hadn't been there when we were at the beach. "This is the warning, Morgan," Jesus said, his voice turning heavy, almost grieving. "The rot starts in the quiet places. It starts with the people who say they love me but have forgotten how to love each other." He pointed to my father. "Your father is low oaking for a way out of his pain, but he is walking into a fire. If he does not turn back, this house will be empty by Christmas." I felt a cold surge of panic. This wasn't a vision of the end of the world. It was the end of my world. I tried to reach out touch my dad's arm, to tell him to put the phone down, to look at my mom, but my hand passed through him like smoke. I looked at Jesus, my eyes stinging. "Why are you showing me this? I'm just a kid." Jesus didn't blink. "Because the children are the why one's still watching. The adults have closed their eyes to the coming storm. Because they are too busy tending to their own shadows. They think they have time. They think the foundation is solid, but the termites have already reached the beams." We were suddenly back in that high, ceilinged library, but the windows now showed a sky that was a bruised, angry purple. Jesus stood directly in front of me, his presence so intense I felt like I might dissolve. "The title of this age is distraction," he said, and the word felt like a physical blow. "People ask why I don't return, why I don't stop the suffering. The truth is, I am standing at the door, but they have locked it from the inside with their own hands. They aren't ready because they have replied at me with a version of themselves that they like better." He leaned down, his eyes locking onto mine with a clarity that stripped away every thought I had. "The warning is this: a great sifting is coming in 2026. It will not be a fire from the sky or away from the sea. It will be a stripping away of everything that is not real. The institutions they trust, the banks, the big steeples, the glowing screens, the why, will all begin to stutter. Those who have built their lives on the noise will be deafened by the silence that follows. They are not ready because they have no quiet in them. They have no room for me." I saw a vision of a massive church, beautiful and double-checked, but as I watched, the walls turned to sand and began to blow away in a wind I couldn't feel. The people inside were screaming, not because they were hurt, but because they realized they were standing on nothing. "When the shaking begins," Jesus said, "only the things held together by love will remain." And right now, Morgan, there is very little love left in the world they have built. They are choosing their own ruin, and they call it progress. The high-ceilinged library dissolved, and I was suddenly standing in a place I didn't recognize. It was a sterile, modern apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking a city I'd never seen. The air felt thin and smelled of expensive vanilla and ozone. I saw a man standing by the window. He was tall, with light stubble and eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in a decade. It took me a second to realize I was looking at myself. This was Morgan at 20-5, but there was no light in him. He was holding a glass of something amber-colored, his hand trembling slightly. "This is the path of the distracted," Jesus said, standing beside me in the silence of the high-rise. I watched my future self pick up a thin, glowing tablet. On the screen, numbers were plummeting in jagged red lines, some kind of digital currency or bank balance. The older Morgan let out a choked, dry sob and threw the glass against the wall. It didn't shatter like glass should. It thudded and leaked, a pathetic sound in a hollow room. "In 2026, Jesus continued, his voice heavy with the weight of what was to come. The things men have placed their security in will evaporate like mist. This version of you, Morgan, believed the lie that safety could be bought. He ignored the quiet voice because the loud one promised him the world. I felt a physical ache in my chest, a reflection of the man's despair. It wasn't just about money. It was the total isolation. There was no one else in the apartment. No wife, no friends, no parents. Just a glowing screen and a failing bank app. The great sifting wasn't a metaphor. It was the literal collapse of the digital pedestals people had built for themselves. The scene shifted again, pulling me into a crowded, dimly lit hallway. I recognized the logo on the wall. It was a major news network. I saw a man I recognized from TV, a journalist everyone trusted for being balanced. He was tucked into a corner, speaking G in a low, frantic hiss to a woman in a sharp business suit. "I can't run the story," the journalist whispered, his eyes darting around. "If I tell the truth about the supply chains, the panic will tank the market before the election. My contract has a immorality clause. I'll lose everything." The woman leaned in, her voice cold. "Then, don't call it a lie. Just call it evolving data. Protect your pension, David. Nobody's a hero in a breadline." I saw the darkness, that oily, copper-smelling smoke, pour out of the woman's mouth and settle into the journalist's collar. He slumped, his face turning that same waxy gray I'd seen in the hospital. He nodded slowly, choosing the lie to save his comfort. "His is why they aren't ready," Jesus said, his expression one of profound, divine sorrow. "Truth has become a commodity to be traded, not a rock to stand on. In the coming year, the gap between what is said and what is true will become a chasm that swallows the weak. They think they are being smart, but they are weaving their own shroud." I watched the journalist walk toward a bright studio light. A fake smile plastered onto his face, while behind him, the shadow grew long and jagged. The compromise wasn't a single moment. It was 1,000 small deaths of the soul, all happening in offices and living rooms across the country simultaneously. We were back in the library, but the bruised sky outside was now swirling with a golden, electric energy. The tension was at a breaking point. Jesus turned to me, and for the first time, I felt the sheer power of his presence. It felt like standing in front of a sun that didn't burn. Morgan, you have seen the fracture. You have seen the price of the noise. Now, you must choose. You can stay here in the quiet and avoid the shaking that is about to begin. Or you can go back and carry the weight of what you know. He held out his hands. They weren't glowing, they were scarred, real and dirty. If I go back, can I stop it? I asked, my voice sounding small and watery in the vastness. Jesus shook his head slowly. The sifting must happen. The wood, that is, rotten, must be cleared so the new growth can breathe. But you can be a reminder. Tell them, the only way to be ready is to let go of the things that are already falling. Tell them to find the quiet again. If they do not find me in the silence now, they will not find me in the storm later. He stepped closer, and the library began to dissolve into white, blinding heat. They aren't ready because they love their chains. Go back. Morgan, tell them the clock hasn't stopped, but the shadows are getting very long. Tell them the king is at the door, but the house is full of strangers. The last thing I saw was his eyes. Not angry, but burning with a fire that wanted to consume everything that wasn't love. Then, the weight of the world slammed back into me, with the force of a high-speed collision. The silence didn't fade, it was shattered. The first thing I felt was a brutal, searing heat in the center of my chest, like a hot iron being pressed into my bones. My lungs, which had been peaceful and still, suddenly convulsed, drawing in a jagged, desperate gulp of air that tasted like ozone and dried blood. I heard a sound, a high-pitched, electronic wail that I realized was the heart monitor. It wasn't a flat tone anymore. It was a frantic, rhythmic beeping. We have a rhythm. Sinus Tatch. He's back, yes, back. The voice was Sarah's, the nurse with the ponytail, but now it was distorted, sounding like it was underwater. I tried to open my eyes, but the fluorescent lights of the ER were like needles stabbing into my brain. I felt my body heavy, impossibly heavy, like I was made of lead. The detachment was gone, replaced by a sensory overload that made me want to scream, but all that came out was a weak, wet cough. I felt hands, cold, rubber, gloved hands, pressing on my neck, hecking my pulse. I looked to the side and saw my dad. He had broken past the orderlies. He was on his knees by the bed, his face buried in the blue and white checkered blanket, his shoulders shaking with sobs that sounded like tearing metal. I reached out a hand, my fingers feeling stiff and clumsy, and touched his matted hair. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and wide with a disbelief that bordered on horror. He didn't say my name. He just gripped my hand so hard it hurt. But as I looked at him, I didn't just see my dad. I saw the shadow I had been shown in the library. The secret, the phone, the Elena who was waiting in the dark of his digital life. The hospital room was real, the pain was real, but the warning was vibrating inside my chest like a second heartbeat. Recovery wasn't a miracle. It was a slow, grueling climb. I spent 2 weeks in the pediatric ICU, my chest bruised purple and yellow from the compressions. Doctors called it sudden arrhythmia death syndrome, SADS, a fluke of electrical signaling in a healthy 9-year-old heart. They talked about pacemakers and beta blockers, but I barely heard them. I was watching. 3 days after I was discharged, we were back at the beach house to pack up. The vacation was over. I was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket despite the Florida heat, when I saw my dad go into the kitchen. He thought I was asleep. I watched through the screen door as he picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen, the same frantic, twitching motion I had seen in the Grok Airy store vision. He started typing. His face set in that hard, distant mask. I stood up, my legs shaking, and walked into the kitchen. "Dad," I said. My voice was raspy from the intubation tube. He jumped, nearly dropping the phone. Morgan, hey, you should be resting. Buddy, I didn't look at his face. I looked at the pocket where he'd just shoved the phone. She's not going to help you, Dad, I whispered. He froze, his skin turning a sickle Y, translucent gray. Who? What are you talking about? I looked him right in the eyes. The ocean storm color of Jesus' eyes still burned into my memory. Elena, if you go to her, this house will be empty by Christmas. That's what he said. He said, you aren't ready for the shaking. My dad didn't move for a long time. The only sound was the hum of the old refrigerator. He didn't ask how I knew. He just turned around, walked to the sink, and threw up. The secret wasn't a secret anymore. It was a wound that had been ripped open. It is now March 30th, 2026. I am 10 years old, and the world feels like it is vibrating on a frequency that only I can hear. The great sifting Jesus spoke about isn't a headline yet, but the cracks are everywhere. This morning, I sat at the breakfast table and watched my mom try to open our banking app. She tapped the screen 3 times, her face tightening. Logged out again, she muttered. They say the servers are under maintenance for the 3rd time this week. I looked at the news ticker on the TV. Supply chain stutters, interest rates adjusting, more talk of evolving data. The people on the screen look exactly like the ghosts in the grocery store, their eyes hollow, their hands shaking as they reach for a comfort that is dissolving between their fingers. The irreversible event happened yesterday. My dad came home from work early. He's been different since the kitchen, quiet, present, but always looking over his shoulder. He sat me down and showed me a letter. It was from the firm he's worked at for 15 years. They were restructuring due to the digital shift, and his position was gone. But that wasn't the thing that changed everything. He took me outside to the old oak tree in our backyard. He pointed to a deep, jagged split in the trunk that hadn't been in there the night before. There hadn't been a storm, no wind, no lightning. The tree, which looked perfectly healthy from the outside, had simply surrendered to its own internal rot and snapped in the middle of a calm, sunny afternoon. I touched the raw W height wood inside the split. It felt cold. I realized then that the library, the warning, and the great sifting weren't dreams. The shaking has moved from the spirit to the soil. I looked up at the clear blue sky, feeling the small, steady beat of my repa-ired heart, and I knew we aren't ready, and the silence is almost over.
If this message felt important, it probably was. There are more stories like this, and they only get deeper. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next one, because some warnings aren't meant to be ignored.